about Elijah Mitchell in the Niner running back situation? McCaffrey obviously is the MVP, candidate. And now you got Jordan Mason and you got Elijah Mitchell. And now you've added Isaac Guerendo. And by the way, you've added Schrader from Missouri, who really has looked good. Who's going to be the run? I mean, the Niners, if people are talking about, well, there's a 6 wide receiver. Most teams carry a combination of 10 wide receivers and running backs.
Yep. So
it's usually 5 and 5. We'll keep 5 receivers, 5 running backs, especially when you got a fullback. So it's really 4 running backs and juice.
Yep.
So either something's got to give. I mean, you got Pearsall, you got Cowing, you got your 3 incumbents. That's 5 receivers right there. So, and then running back wise, CMC, Mason, Mitchell, Juice, Guerendo. That's 5.
Yep.
But then Cody Schrader, I think, is really, really good. So that's 6. So, I mean, somebody's going to get squeezed. There's probably going to be, just based on what I can tell, unless there's injuries, and there always is something, but we can't necessarily project that. If without projecting an injury, give me your running back that gets traded or your wide receiver that gets traded, because to me, almost all these guys are too good to cut. I think, you might be able to cut Cody Schrader, but I wouldn't cut Elijah Mitchell, and I wouldn't cut Jordan Mason. And receiver wise, I don't know that I would cut, some of the guys that they have outside of their top 5. Who's going to get squeezed out, if in your mind, at running back or wide receiver?
Yeah, you make a good point as far as accumulating the roster numbers and including Kyle Juszczyk, because that takes pretty much a running back away from there being 5 running backs on the team, because you have to carry the fullback. So 4 running backs, those are the 4 allotted spots for this position group. And I think it's going to be a really, really good training camp battle, in addition to backup defensive end and defensive tackle, linebacker 3, corner. And I think safety is pretty much set in stone, but we'll see what happens with Talanoa Hufanga's recovery. And then wide receiver is an incredible roster battle as far as who makes that 5th and or 6th spot. So with Elijah Mitchell, I've talked about him as one of my surprise candidates on the show, and it's not for the lack of ability. I think that Elijah Mitchell's been a really good player in his career. He's played 27 games and he's averaged 5.5 yards per carry. He's been very productive, but he's been productive when he's been available. And we all know the saying, you can't make the club from the tub. And Elijah Mitchell has literally been injured every single year that he's been in the NFL. He had a great rookie campaign in 2021 for that team that made that late surge and made it to the NFC Championship game before losing to the Rams. He only played 11 games that year. Now his numbers, 207 carries, 963 yards. And the career yards per carry is at 4.7. He averaged 4.7 that year, but he only played 11 games. Following year, he played 5. And then this year he played 11. So I always think that when you talk about players who might get traded or might get cut, look at the team's actions. Look at a person's actions. What have they done? Because that tells a story. And after 2021, you're thinking, man, if Elijah Mitchell can stay healthy, could he be a feature back in Kyle Shanahan's offense? He gets hurt. What do the Niners do? They trade for Christian McCaffrey. And then what did they do this offseason? They traded up for Isaac Guerendo. They signed Cody Schrader as a UDFA. They like Jordan Mason, even though I hope that they can trust him a little bit more to give him more carries. But this offseason, it looks as though he's added pass catching to his arsenal. And Elijah Mitchell last year, I thought he just looked slow. He didn't have the explosion, the speed, or the giddy up that I saw as a rookie, and have all of those injuries kind of caught up to him, because he's what you call a high runner, which then he's susceptible to getting hit on his lower half. And I think that's why he suffered some of these knee injuries. That's the one that knocked him out against Chicago in week 1 back in his sophomore campaign in 2022. So with this running back room, if Elijah Mitchell doesn't look the same athletically and he continues to get hurt, what is the point of having him on this team when you have Jordan Mason, who's that physical back, who's the thunder to the lightning that is Christian McCaffrey? You traded up for Isaac Guerendo, and he's a guy with an incredible skill set, who had a relative athletic score grade of 999, who's 6 foot 221, a 41.5-inch vertical, who ran a 4.33 40-yard dash. And then Cody Schrader doesn't have the athletic traits, not even close, but he's just a grinder. And I think that this Niners coaching staff could really fall in love with him. So the Niners actions, I think, has spoken loudly with their concerns about Elijah Mitchell for the past 2 years. And if he gets cut, I won't be surprised all too much.
Yeah, one of the interesting articles I stumbled onto this morning was potential surprise cut candidates for all 32 teams, NFL teams ahead of training camp. And of course, the important dates to remember, teams are going to pare their roster down 3 p.m. Central Time on August 27th. The clubs have to clear their roster from 90-man camp rosters to 53-man active rosters. So that's the key date. That's cut down day in the NFL, August the 27th. The NFL trade deadline, by the way, coming up this year on November the 5th. So it's not until early November. But this is interesting, and this is an article about potential surprise cuts for every team. And I wanted to see who they had for the Niners, and sure enough, they have Elijah Mitchell. And, they're basically just, Nicholas McGee, the beat writer, who's the guy who chose Mitchell. And I know Nicholas, and he's a good guy and a good writer. But yeah, I mean, it makes sense. I mean, we basically just kind of summing up what you just basically said right there about Mitchell, that, there's other guys now, and you've got Garendo, and you got Schrader, and you got McCaffrey, and you still got Juice. And, there's only so many spots on the roster at running back. You're not going to go. How did
Patrick Taylor look this offseason, by the way?
I thought he looked great.
Yeah. So that's another guy who we haven't even mentioned.
Yeah. I mean,
and he
when
can
I
play
say great,
teams, by the way.
He is a tremendous athlete. You're talking about a 6'3". He kind of reminds me of, remember the back when the Packers won the Super Bowl, they had named James Starks.
Yep.
He reminds me a little bit of James Starks in that he runs kind of upright. He's tall. He's super uber athletic. Like a very impressive athlete to see on the practice field. Yeah. So, I mean, we didn't even thought about him. We didn't even mention him.
Yeah.
So, So, I mean, they're loaded at running back. Okay, but here's the list, and I'm looking at this list of guys who could be, cut at the end of camp, in August, and it's an interesting list. And I'll just throw out some of the interesting names and some of the names I could see matching the Niners, or I'd be interested in. I mean, Khalil Herbert from the Bears. I mean, I think that's a pretty good player right there. I'm not saying for the Niners, but just I think he's a pretty good running back. If I'm Dallas, I'd be all over Khalil Herbert. The Bengals edge rusher, Joseph Osai, who played at Texas and had that hit on Mahomes in the playoff game, out of bounds. Do you remember that hit?
Yep.
He was, he's interesting. They're saying he might be expendable in Cincinnati. If I'm the Niners, you got Drake Jackson, you got Robert Beal, but Joseph Osai is probably better than them. So that's an interesting one. Couple others that are interesting. They're saying the Bucs may cut Kyle Trask. Cardinals may cut the running back Michael Carter, like Tim in college. Chiefs may cut McCole Hardman, they're saying. How about this one? The Colts, they say, may cut Mo Alley Cox. Mo Alley Cox might be a better tight end than the Niners have.
Yep.
Outside of Kittle, right? That would be interesting. I
think I saw Juju Schuster on that list, too.
Yeah. Here's the guy that the Eagles used to have. Didn't the Eagles used to have the wide receiver Olamide Zacchaeus?
Olamide Zacchaeus. Yeah.
Yeah. He's now with the Commanders.
Yep.
But, he's an interesting receiver. They say the Cowboys may cut Deuce Vaughn, who's a interesting little special teamer. Jeff Wilson, the former Niner, they're saying maybe gets cut in Miami. They're saying James Bradbury maybe gets cut in Philly. Is that going to happen, Chase?
Yeah, that could happen just because they're really deep at corner.
Especially now they got Quinyon Mitchell and Cooper DeJean.
Yep.
Here's another one. Falcons may cut safety Richie Grant. Richie Grant's a good player, man. I would take Richie Grant for the Niners in a second.
I think they need to add a safety.
Yeah. I mean, and I'm going to ask you one about that in a second, but Giants also, they say, may cut wide receiver Isaiah Hodgins, who's, not the greatest runner. And now they added Neighbors and they've got depth there. But, guy like that is a really dependable possession receiver. He's from the Bay Area. He went to Berean High School about a mile from where I'm sitting right now. And he's a 6'4" receiver with great hands. I mean, if I'm the 49ers, I would love to have Isaiah Hodgins as a red zone threat, big receiver with hands like that. The Jaguars have a safety, Andrew Wingard, who they say may get cut. The Jets running back, Izzy Abanaconda. I loved Izzy. He got hurt. We saw it last year in Hard Knocks, but Izzy is a big-time back. He was a really good player. At Pittsburgh, I believe, in college. John Kaminsky, the edge rusher for the Lions, is on this list. A.J. Dillon, the running back for the Packers. Miles Sanders, the running back for Carolina. Juju, as you said, Smith-Schuster. There, Joe Notaboom, the Rams offensive tackle. Some interesting guys. The ones, though, that really are interesting down the list here. The Saints, they say, may cut Isaiah Foskey. Now, if I'm the 49ers, before Isaiah Foskey gets cut, I would offer a day 3 pick for Isaiah Foskey. He's 23. He was their second-round pick in last year's draft. They signed Chase Young to come off the edge. They also have Peyton Turner, and they got a bunch of other guys there, Granderson. And if Foskey gets cut, he's a guy that I absolutely would want. And then the other guy is the Seahawks. They say may cut their edge rusher, Darrell Taylor, who I loved at Tennessee. If he gets cut, I'd probably try to get him. And then the Steelers, they say, may cut offensive tackle Dan Moore. And Dan Moore might be better than Jalen Moore as far as offensive tackles go. I mean, if I'm the Niners, I'd be interested. Of those names, is there one that intrigues you?
I'm always willing to take a shot on a player who had a high draft pedigree. They had a high draft pedigree for a reason, and especially along the defensive line, where I think the Niners could use another edge. Maybe Robert Beal can have a really big year this year and be one of those breakout candidates. That would help you there, but Leonard Floyd's a little bit older. Yeturgos Matos is unproven. Drake Jackson coming off the big injury. So Isaiah Foskey is a guy who I looked at in the pre-draft process last year, who was the 40th overall pick out of Notre Dame. And
came to the Niners local pro day. He's from, he went to De La Salle. He's from,
De La Salle, Concord, California. He was really highly touted coming out of high school. He played in the All-American Bowl. And that's a player that I would like to take a shot on, because you think about what Chris Kocurek would be able to do with a player like that and what he's done with these types of players. Last year, Cleveland Ferrell. And then before that, I thought he did a great job of maximizing Arden Key. He got paid elsewhere. Charles Omenihu, he got a bag from the Kansas City Chiefs. So Isaiah Foskey and John Kaminsky are the two players that kind of stand out to me on that list, because I never think that you can have enough edge rushers.
Yeah, that's a good call. Albert Breer has an article out saying that the Niners ought to consider Justin Simmons, who went to the Pro Bowl. And the safety is clearly a need spot for the 49ers, and they could definitely use another player, especially with, Hufanga being somewhat of an unknown. But I'll tell you, I read an article last week coming out of Minnesota that I thought was really intriguing, and that is Lewis Cine, who played at Georgia.
Yep.
Which I'm surprised he's not a Philadelphia Eagle, right? Because it seems like they go for every Georgia player.
Yeah.
But Lewis Cine got drafted by Minnesota, I think second-round pick. I loved Lewis Cine at Georgia. He's a hitter. He won a national championship there. He just was an impact guy. They're saying that that Cine, if you look at the Viking depth chart, is buried on their depth chart, and maybe a guy who's going to get cut at the cut down. Like, their number one free safety is Cam Bynum. Their number one strong safety is Harrison Smith. But now their number two, their second rated, their second team group is Jay Ward and Theo Jackson. And Lewis Cine is their fifth safety on the list. And they're saying that he may get cut at the cut down. I know he broke his leg. He had a surgery on it. So there's that concern. How did he bounce back from that thing? But this guy, he was a first-round pick. This guy wasn't even a second-round pick. They took Lewis Cine in the first round.
Yep.
And I'll tell you, I love Justin Simmons and I love Budda Baker, and we've talked about a lot of these guys. But if a guy like Cine, if you could get him at the cut down or get him for a day 3 pick, kind of like a Lakin Tomlinson trade where they traded a 5th-round pick for a guy who was drafted by the Lions in the first round a couple years earlier, I'd take a shot on Lewis Cine if I were the Niners. I mean, he's exactly the kind of piece that I would like to see them add. Not going to cost you a ton. It's kind of like low risk, potentially high reward. What do you think of Cine?
I do think that the Niners need to add a safety because they're a little bit thin there. They haven't brought back Deshaun Gibson as of right now. Talanoa Hufanga is coming off a torn ACL. Jair Brown, I thought, was really good as a rookie, and he's due for a breakout campaign as he becomes the full-time starter for the entire year going into year 2. After that, though, they extended George Odom, gave him some good money, but he's more of a special teams player. And they have Taylor Hawkins, who's a journeyman special teams player. If there were to be an injury to Talanoa Hufanga, or his recovery is delayed, or Jair Brown were to go down, the Niners are kind of screwed on that back end. And there are players really out there who can be had. Lewis Seen, Justin Simmons is still a free agent. Eddie Jackson was an All-Pro in 2018. Quandre Diggs is a player who I still think has some gas left in the tank. Lewis Seen, it's been a disastrous pick for Minnesota because they drafted him with the final pick in the 3rd round. He had 1 coverage snap in 2023, and then in his first year, he had 2 coverage snaps. So they've barely gotten anything out of him. But going back to what we were talking about with Isaiah Foskey and John Kaminsky, those are high picks, players with pedigree, players with ability. And I think a big reason why the Niners have been so good recently is their player development. They've done a really good job of scouting, coaching, developing, and really grooming these players and maximizing them. And Seen was a player who at Georgia was stellar. He was the national championship game defensive MVP back in 2022.
Right.
You have to imagine that at some point, a player is going to be able to stay healthy. I know there are players like Jason Verrett who are so snake bitten by injuries and they literally can't stay healthy. But this is still a really young player who's only 24 years old that I would like to see the Niners take a shot on in trying to develop if he were to get let go by Minnesota.
He's listed as their third-rated Vikings third-rated strong safety. Can he play the deep middle? Can he play can he cover the deep middle in a cover 3 zone? Or Niners play a lot of zone and they play a lot of cover 3 typically. Do you think that that's the question. Like, of the Niners safety group, who do you think is most ideally suited between Jair Brown, Talanoa Hufanga, and Malik Mustafa to play free safety and cover the grass and cover the deep middle and be that coverage player down the field? Or is it none of the above and it's more like somebody like Renardo Green? I mean, who's the Niners starting free safety? Because to me, it seems like Brown, Hufanga, and Mustafa all kind of pencil in as strong safeties. Am I seeing that right?
No, you're right. And bad job by me for not mentioning Malik Mustafa when we were talking about the safety spot. I really liked him as a prospect coming out of Wake Forest, and I was happy that the Niners signed him. And I talked to him at the NFL Scouting Combine, and he talked about his meeting with San Francisco and kind of what he brings to the table. Extremely high character and is just a stacked athlete. He's really maximized his frame. And the thing that is funny about Hufanga, Brown, and Mustafa, like you said, they're all like versatile safeties who have been used and utilized as kind of chess pieces on the defense. And they've been players who can play in the box, little hybrid linebacker, little slot nickel corner. They're not necessarily that traditional deep guy. If there are 2 of those 3 players who I think can serve that role, it's more Jair Brown and it's Malik Mustafa, just because they have more natural center field abilities. And I'm always an advocate of putting a player in a position to succeed. And I think part of the greatness of Talanoa Hufanga is that you can kind of put him all around the field in multiple positions, and he makes plays and has such a great feel for the game. So I want to take him out. I don't want to take him out of that type of role. But that's also why there were some rumblings this offseason that the Niners were like, should we bring in a safety? We're not sure how we're going to utilize him. We might be switching defensive tendencies a little bit, and he's in the final year of his contract. So that's also as part of the overall safety positional battle. How they're used, where they're used is going to be really interesting to see under a new defensive coordinator, Nick Sorensen, come July and August.
Yeah, no question. A couple last ones before we let you go. One is, if you said who were the impact rookies last year, that kind of came out of nowhere. I mean, Puka Nacua was a 5th-round pick, and he was awesome, right? He went number 177. Rams also got great production out of Kobe Turner, the big Wake Forest defensive tackle, I believe. They got in the 3rd round, 89 overall. There was a pretty interesting article this week about some candidates around the league who could be this year's version of Puka or possibly this year's version of Kobe Turner, kind of overlook rookies who didn't go in the 1st round but might really bust out in their rookie year. And so I'm reading the article, and sure enough, here it is. They're talking about Dominic Puni. And they're saying, man, Puni, the Kansas product, who the Niners took 51st overall, he was number 8 among interior offensive linemen drafted, that he actually, there's a lot of belief that he might be a bust-out guy. And they had a quote here from the offensive line scout, Brandon Thorne, on the former Jayhawk. He says, overall, Puni's a strapping, powerfully built prospect with an impressive blend of girth, body control, pad level, and that unlocks jolting, sudden power on contact. He says he boasts the steer and sustain skills to compete and win a starting guard job within his first contract. He also has the ability to play tackle in a pinch. So he did play, I guess he played in a zone-based scheme at Kansas, but there was some gap, some gap concepts there as well. Obviously, Chris Forster is very high on Puni. The Niners will probably have Puni compete with Feliciano and Burford for that starting right guard job. What do you think, Chase? I mean, it's only June 28th. We're a month away from camp, but I would say this might be one of the real fun, position battles to watch this summer. Puni versus Burford versus Feliciano versus Zakel or anybody else who cares to step up at right guard. What do you think? Is Puni going to be a plug and play guy as a 3rd round draft choice at right guard, or does Burford get that gig, or is it Feliciano and they go Brendel and Feliciano and kind of go conservative with some older guys? How do you see that shaking out?
I think 3/5 of the Niners offensive line are in a cloudy spot right now, but we know who 3 starters are going to be. Trent Williams and Aaron Banks on the left side. That's a great left guard, left tackle combination. When they have shared the field together, they've given up just 1 sack. So they've been really good flanking one another on the left side. I'm not a huge Colton McKivitz fan. I think he's more of a backup swing tackle for a team that has Super Bowl aspirations, but there isn't a tackle on this team that I think is capable of unseating him as a starter, because Chris Hubbard didn't show up for any OTAs. And I just don't like that as a look for a guy who maybe would have had a chance to unseat McKivitz at right tackle and has started a lot of games and has played okay at that right tackle position. Center and right guard, those are the 2 remaining positions that I haven't touched on yet. And I think there are dominoes to fall with those 2 positions. Jake Brendel has dealt with knee tendonitis this offseason. I think that he's a little bit small for the position. I think up until 2 years ago, he was a journeyman for a reason. I think he's more of a depth piece. If he doesn't claim the starting role at center, could the Niners go with Ben Barch? Could they go with the Michigan kid whose name is escaping me right now? Drake Nugent. Those are 2 options.
Drake Nugent Drake Nugent in the minicamp looked phenomenal. And when I say that, he's lifting guys off the ground. You're seeing
great leverage.
Yeah, the guy plays low and fires his hands. There was a lot to like with Drake Nugent. You can kind of tell, even without the pads, that guy's going to be a force to be, competed with this summer.
So Ben Barch and Drake Nugent are options if it's not Jake Brendel. But John Feliciano is also an option. 2 years ago, before signing with the Niners, he was the full-time starting center for the New York Giants, and he played pretty well there. And if he starts at center, then that opens up more opportunities at right guard for Spencer Burford, for Dominic Puni, for Jarrett Kingston, because he might be a guard at the next level because him and Puni have shorter arms. So it all kind of depends on what the Niners go with. Ultimately, I think they run it back with the same offensive line that took them to the Super Bowl, and it's Trent Williams at left tackle, Aaron Banks at left guard, Jake Brendel at center, John Feliciano at right guard, who played excellent last year and can play center and left guard, and then Colton McKivitz at right tackle. But if you drop Dominic Puni in the 3rd round and he's out there pancaking dudes and he's playing well, he looks to be a scheme fit. He's agile on some of these pull blocks. He played guard at the college level. And then last year he played primarily left tackle where he didn't give up a sack. So clearly that tells me he's fleet of foot. He's athletic enough to play guard on the interior if he can hold up well on the outside at left tackle, protecting the blind side for his quarterback at Kansas. So if he plays well, how could you deny that? If Spencer Burford takes a big leap, I think the best situation for this offensive line is going with Puni or Burford at right guard. They live up to their potential, and then move Feliciano to center, who I think is a better option as compared to Jake Brendel. So that's another one of these training camp battles that I think right now is somewhat up in the air. The Niners could be stubborn and just run it back and say, we average nearly 30 points per game with this offensive line. We are a very effective running team. Brock Purdy had an incredible year. We like continuity. That's fine, and I think the continuity certainly matters, but I want the best offensive line unit in February, not week 1. And I'm building to that throughout the season, maybe by reshuffling the deck a little bit.
If you could attend training camp, who's the 49er that you would most want to see this summer? Is there one that I mean, there's a bunch of guys. You can name 25 guys.
Yeah.
But is there somebody that you're like, man, I'm really, really curious to see player X?
Yeah, I want to get my eyes on Ricky Pearsall. I want to see if the route running, the footwork translates. I want to see that his vertical separation I thought was a little bit concerning at Florida, which is why I think he's more of an inside guy. I know he ran a 4.4, but he doesn't have that getaway speed. And does that cause problems at the next level, or does that translate to the next level where it's not as much of a weakness as I thought? I really just want to see the route running. I want to see how he holds up as an athlete because he's a little bit smaller. So that's probably the player that I'd be curious to see, because I do think as a rookie, with him manning the middle area of the field where Brock Purdy really flourishes, I think that he could have a really big role as a rookie. I also want to see the development of D. Winters and Jalen Graham. I've kind of nerded out on both of those players, and I want to see if they can maybe unseat Devondre Campbell as linebacker 3.
Yeah, for me, it's the DBs. I want to see Renardo Green.
Yeah,
I want to see Malik Mustafa. I want to see Jalen Mahoney. I've heard some good things about him. Really want to see Isaac Yadam. He's coming off a tremendous year with the Saints. I want to see Darrell Luter. I want to see Samuel Womack. So there's a bunch of young DBs, some free agents there, some existing players, some draft picks. All guys I want to see this summer. But I think if I could hang out by the DB workout and watch some of their drills, I think that's the group that I'd want to hone in on.